certain men aren't hidden from view. They deliberately choose invisibility. In a culture where everyone constantly posts, updates, and broadcasts their every move, a small number of men take the opposite path. No relentless posting, no daily check-ins, no urge to display their existence for strangers to consume. And oddly enough, those are exactly the men who earn the deepest respect. That contradiction throws people off because we've been conditioned to believe visibility equals worth, that showing more brings more attention, and more attention translates into greater significance. But that's not how reality actually functions. Many of the most disciplined, focused, and admired men steer clear of that online performance. They feel no urge to constantly justify themselves. They don't crave validation. They don't chase approval. And because of that, their movement, their thinking, and how others perceive them all shift dramatically. So here's the real question. Why do certain men embrace quiet in a culture that rewards noise? Is it insecurity, fear, or something far more profound that most people fail to grasp? Because once this clicks for you, your entire view of social media behavior transforms. You'll understand why some men constantly broadcast themselves while others vanish from the feed entirely. And more critically, you'll recognize which approach actually carries more real power. Men who avoid posting aren't disengaged, they're deliberate. Most people interpret online silence as a deficiency, maybe low confidence, a lackluster lifestyle, or fading relevance. But in truth, what appears to be absence is often mastery. In a culture obsessed with being seen, the decision to withhold becomes an act of strength. Everyone else is broadcasting wins, sharing moments, hunting for reactions, and gradually, self-worth becomes tangled up with visibility. The more eyes on you, the more significant you feel. The more reactions you collect, the more important you seem. Men who opt out of that cycle refuse to play along. They aren't chasing proof of anything. They aren't curating an image, and they aren't performing for spectators. Their attention lies elsewhere entirely. Grasp this fully. When a man feels no compulsion to constantly showcase his life, it's usually a sign he's already secure in it. He doesn't require applause to validate his growth, and he doesn't need onlookers to confirm he's advancing. That builds an entirely different kind of presence. Because his worth no longer hinges on exposure, it's rooted in what's actually real. Control matters here too. A man who selects what he reveals dictates how he's perceived.
He decides what's visible, what stays hidden, and how much access others get into his world.
When people can't see everything, their curiosity intensifies. They start wondering, start paying closer attention, because mystery consistently pulls more interest than non-stop exposure ever could. This isn't about vanishing from existence. It's about discipline, recognizing that authenticity doesn't require display. And once a man internalizes that truth, he stops performing and starts genuinely constructing something real. Men who don't post grasp the value of privacy, and that alone sets them apart from most. They don't view their life as content to broadcast. They see it as something meant to be lived. While others rush to showcase every win, every purchase, every fleeting moment, these men operate differently because they don't rely on spectators to legitimize their progress. Their victories are celebrated privately. Their struggles are handled without an audience. That equilibrium builds a kind of inner steadiness most people never develop. Understand this clearly. Once your entire life becomes public, you surrender control over how it's interpreted. People craft assumptions, form judgments, and attach narratives that may have nothing to do with your reality. But guarding your privacy protects your space. You determine what holds significance, what remains personal, and what never sees the light of day. That control breeds peace because you're no longer living for external reactions. You're living for yourself. Privacy also lifts an invisible weight. Constant posters eventually feel pressured to sustain an image, to keep proving progress, to keep meeting expectations manufactured online. A man operating privately carries none of that burden. He moves at his own rhythm, builds at his own tempo, and savors moments without calculating how they'll appear to onlookers. There's a deeper layer here too. Things of genuine value rarely need to be showcased. Authentic progress, real growth, true success don't depend on visibility to be legitimate. In fact, the more something stays protected, the more meaning it holds. That's precisely why these men treat life as something to be experienced, not exhibited. So the next time you encounter a man who never posts, don't assume nothing's happening in his world. More often than not, the exact opposite is true. He has something substantial, and he understands that value doesn't require an audience to be real. Silence isn't emptiness, it's mastery wearing a quiet disguise. While the world screams for attention, chasing likes like oxygen, these men have discovered something far rarer: peace that doesn't need permission, power that doesn't need witnesses. They aren't hiding. They're building, brick by brick, decision by decision, far from the noise, far from the scoreboard everyone else is obsessed with. And one day, the world will look up and suddenly notice what was quietly constructed the entire time, not because it was announced, but because it became undeniable. That is the strength no algorithm can measure, and no feed can capture. Real men don't need the world watching to know they're winning. They already know. And that knowing, unshaken, untouched, unbothered, is the loudest statement silence has ever made. Choose depth over display. Choose substance over spectacle. Because the ones who master invisibility today are the ones who become unforgettable tomorrow. There is a certain kind of man who has stopped explaining himself, and that single shift changes everything about how he moves through the world. He no longer feels the pull to justify his choices, defend his silence, or account for time spent away from a screen. This isn't arrogance. It isn't coldness. It's simply the natural outcome of a man who has stopped outsourcing his sense of self to an audience that was never invested in his life to begin with. And once you notice this pattern in a man, you start to realize that the loudest people in any room are often the ones still searching for something, while the quietest ones have usually already. Think about how differently a man carries himself when he isn't performing. His decisions slow down because he isn't rushing to capture a moment before it disappears into a feed. His conversations deepen because he isn't half present, already composing the caption in his head. His relationships strengthen because the people around him get his full attention instead of a filtered version reserved for strangers online. This is the quiet cost that most people never calculate. Every moment spent curating a life for public consumption is a moment stolen from actually living it. Men who understand this instinctively begin protecting their moments the way they protect their money, not spending them carelessly, not handing them out to anyone who asks, saving the richest experiences for the people and pursuits that actually deserve them. There is also something worth understanding about how silence interacts with respect. Respect has never been something you can demand through visibility. You cannot post your way into being taken seriously. Real respect is built slowly, through consistency that nobody had to witness to believe. A man who shows up for his family without announcing it, who handles his responsibilities without narrating them, who builds his skills without live streaming the process, that man earns a form of credibility that no highlight reel can manufacture. People sense authenticity even when they can't articulate why. They notice that his confidence isn't rehearsed for a camera. They notice that his calm isn't a performance. And slowly, without him ever asking for it, that becomes magnetic. It's also worth examining what happens internally when a man removes the audience from his life. Something interesting occurs, his standards change. When no one is watching, most people either let themselves go, or they discover their most honest self. For men who choose privacy intentionally, it's almost always the latter. They start doing things not because they'll look good, but because they actually matter. They train not for a transformation photo, but because health is non-negotiable to them. They read not to quote something impressive, but because understanding genuinely interests them. They build not for applause, but because creation itself feels meaningful. This is the difference between a life built for an audience and a life built for its own sake. And only one of those survives when the applause stops. There's a psychological principle worth mentioning here, often referred to as the observer effect. People behave differently when they know they're being watched. It's not conscious dishonesty, it's simply human nature to adjust behavior under observation. This is exactly why constant visibility subtly corrupts authenticity over time. Even without realizing it, a person who posts everything begins making decisions with half an eye on how those decisions will be perceived. Which vacation looks better? Which gym session photographs well? Which relationship milestone deserves an announcement? The audience, even imagined one, becomes a silent collaborator in every choice. Men who step back from that constant exposure remove the observer entirely, and what's left is a version of themselves shaped purely by their own values, not by anticipated reactions. Another overlooked aspect of this quiet approach is how it changes a man's relationship with failure. Publicly visible lives create publicly visible setbacks. Every stumble becomes material for judgment, comparison, or quiet mockery from people who were never rooting for success in the first place. Men who operate privately are shielded from this. Their failures happen in private, which means they can process them honestly, learn from them without performance anxiety, and rebuild without an audience keeping score. This privacy around failure is often what allows for faster recovery and more honest self-assessment. There is no ego to protect in front of a crowd because there was never a crowd watching in the first place. It's important to address something people often get wrong about this mindset, mistaking quiet discipline for isolation or coldness. These men are not necessarily withdrawn from real human connection. In fact, many of them invest more deeply in the relationships directly in front of them precisely because they aren't distracted by managing an online persona. The energy that would have gone into responding to comments, checking notifications, or crafting captions instead flows into actual conversations, actual presence, actual attention given to the people who matter. Ironically, stepping back from a digital audience often makes a man more present, not less connected. His depth doesn't disappear. It simply stops being distributed across thousands of strangers and starts being concentrated on the few relationships that actually shape his life. There's also a financial and strategic layer to this quiet discipline that rarely gets discussed. Many of the most successful men in business, investing, and entrepreneurship operate with minimal public visibility, and this is rarely accidental. Visibility invites competition, scrutiny, and unnecessary attention to strategies still being developed. A man building something significant understands that revealing plans prematurely invites imitation, criticism, or interference before an idea has had the chance to mature. Silence, in this context, becomes a competitive advantage. While others are busy explaining their 5-year plan to strangers online, the quiet man is 3 years into executing his, unnoticed and unbothered, because he never gave anyone the chance to doubt him before he had already proven it. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from not needing anyone to understand you in real time. Most people crave immediate recognition. They want their effort acknowledged the moment it happens. But men who operate quietly have made peace with delayed recognition, or sometimes no recognition at all beyond their own satisfaction. This patience is rare, and it's precisely what allows them to commit to long, unglamorous processes that don't offer instant gratification. Building a business takes years before it looks impressive. Building physical strength takes months before it becomes visible. Building expertise takes seasons of quiet repetition before it becomes valuable. A man addicted to visibility struggles to endure these invisible stretches because he's wired to seek proof that his effort is being noticed. A man comfortable with silence has no such requirement, which is precisely why he often outlasts everyone chasing shortcuts to relevance.